Arthur Whitaker leaned back in his sleek leather chair, gazing at the glittering skyline through the penthouse window. This view, his view, was a constant reminder of how far he'd come. From his sprawling empire in finance to his reputation as a mogul who made things happen, Arthur had carved out a kingdom that revolved entirely around him. Tonight, his kingdom extended to the Grand Meridian, where the city's elite gathered for the Whitaker Foundation Gala. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, and waiters moved in synchronized precision, offering hors d'oeuvres to attendees dressed in designer tuxedos and gowns. Arthur was the center of attention, basking in the praise of benefactors and celebrities who clamored to shake his hand. "An incredible turnout, Mr. Whitaker," said Miranda, his personal assistant, who handed him a glass of champagne. "This year's event has already raised over $2 million for veteran rehabilitation programs." Arthur nodded, though his interest was superficial. The gala wasn't about veterans. It was about optics. Every donation, every sponsorship, was a strategic investment in his image as a self-made magnate who cared. Later, Arthur stood at the podium, commanding the room with his confidence. His speech was carefully rehearsed and delivered with charisma. "Success," he declared, "is not something handed to you. It's earned. It takes grit, discipline, and vision. That's why we're here tonight, to inspire those values in others and give back to those who fought for our freedoms." Polite applause followed, but some faces in the crowd showed unease. As the night progressed, an unexpected interruption came when a man approached Arthur near the champagne fountain. The man's clothes were plain, his posture humble. His salt and pepper hair suggested years of hardship, but his expression was earnest. "Mr. Whitaker," the man began, his voice steady, "thank you for what you're doing for veterans like me." Arthur raised a hand, cutting him off with a thin smile. "I appreciate your gratitude, but let's not confuse charity with dependency. You should focus on building yourself up. That's the real way forward." The man blinked, stunned. The conversation had been snuffed out before it began. A faint ripple of discomfort spread among nearby guests as Arthur turned his attention to someone else, leaving the man standing awkwardly alone. By the end of the night, Arthur left the gala feeling triumphant. The event had been a resounding success, at least in his eyes. He didn't spare another thought for the man he had dismissed so easily. Arthur's mornings were a routine blend of power and precision. The day after the gala, he sat at his kitchen island, scrolling through headlines on his tablet. Unsurprisingly, the Whitaker Foundation Gala had dominated the news. "Arthur Whitaker raises millions for veterans," one headline boasted. The accompanying photo showed him mid-speech, a commanding figure against the backdrop of the elegant ballroom. Arthur allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. As he sipped his coffee, Miranda called. "Good news," she said. "The press coverage is stellar, and we've already received several invitations for you to headline similar events." "Of course," Arthur replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Let's keep the momentum going." He didn't think of the man from the gala until later that afternoon. Walking through his corporate offices, Arthur overheard two employees discussing the event. "Did you see that veteran trying to talk to him?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "Seemed like he really wanted to say something important." Arthur's jaw tightened. The man had been out of place. The gala was about progress and success, not pity stories. Arthur dismissed the thought as he entered the boardroom. Yet, something lingered in the back of his mind. That evening, as Arthur unwound in his study, a memory from decades ago resurfaced: smoke, heat, and the sound of shattering glass. He was a boy again, trapped in a house engulfed in flames, his mother's screams ringing in his ears. But just as quickly as it had come, the memory dissolved. Arthur shook his head and refocused on his documents. The following week, during a lunch meeting, a casual comment from a colleague hit a nerve. "You've really come far, Arthur." Remember when your family lost everything in that fire? And look at you now, running the city." Arthur froze momentarily, then forced a laugh. "Yes, well, adversity builds character," he said, brushing the comment aside. Later that night, as Arthur sat alone in his penthouse, the memory clawed its way back. He remembered being pulled from the flames, coughing and crying, but safe. The details were hazy. Who had saved him? He had never thought much about it. The sale of the family property had helped them rebuild, and Arthur had used every setback as a stepping stone to rise to the top. For the first time in years, Arthur wondered about the fire. His success was built on surviving that moment, but he had never considered the cost or the people involved. The thoughts unsettled him, but he quickly pushed them aside. There was no room in his life for distractions from the past. Arthur prided himself on his ability to focus. Yet, in the days following the gala, he found himself distracted by small things: a name, a face, a half-forgotten memory that refused to fade. He was scrolling through his emails one morning when a message caught his eye. The subject line read, "Thank you for supporting veterans." Arthur opened it, expecting generic praise. Instead, it contained a brief, handwritten note scanned and attached. "Your contribution changed lives. It's rare to see someone like you helping someone like me. We remember." No sender's name, no further explanation. Arthur frowned. There was something unsettling about the message's tone. He closed the email, telling himself it was probably a well-meaning but overly sentimental gesture. Yet the note stayed in his mind as the day wore on. He dismissed it at first, but then came another email, then another, each with similar anonymous messages. The words seemed earnest, almost intimate. Arthur tried to shrug it off, but unease began to settle in. Arthur sat in the back of his chauffeured car, scrolling through his phone, when a headline caught his attention. "Forgotten Heroes: The Untold Stories of Veterans Sacrificing for Civilians." The article detailed acts of bravery during tragedies, fires, floods, disasters, and highlighted veterans who had risked their lives to save others. Arthur skimmed it quickly, but one name stood out: Samuel Gray. The article described Gray as a former firefighter who had lost a leg during a rescue operation. It wasn't the name itself that struck Arthur, but the accompanying photo. The man's salt-and-pepper hair and weathered face looked familiar. Arthur's grip on his phone tightened. It was him, the man from the gala. The article briefly mentioned the incident that had cost Samuel his leg, a residential fire decades ago. The location was painfully familiar to Arthur. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. That night, Arthur dreamt of fire. He was back in the inferno, a boy again, choking on smoke. Flames licked the walls, the air a cacophony of screams and destruction. Then, a figure emerged from the chaos, a man with strong arms, lifting him from the wreckage. Arthur woke abruptly, drenched in sweat. He stared at the ceiling, his heart racing. Was it possible? Could the man he had dismissed so easily be the same one who had saved his life? He didn't want to believe it. The idea gnawed at him, leaving him restless. Determined to confirm his suspicions, Arthur made a decision. The next morning, Arthur instructed Miranda to dig into the details of the fire from his childhood. "Look for rescue reports," he said. "Anything about firefighters or first responders involved in the incident." Miranda, though puzzled by the unusual request, complied. By the afternoon, she had returned with records. As Arthur scanned the reports, his worst fears were confirmed. Among the names listed in the official documentation was Samuel Gray, a firefighter who had suffered critical injuries while rescuing a young boy trapped inside. Arthur's chest tightened. The man he had humiliated at his gala wasn't just a stranger. He was the reason Arthur was alive. Arthur sat alone in his office, staring at the old fire report on his desk. The words blurred together as the weight of the revelation sank in. Samuel Gray, the man he had dismissed with a flippant remark at the gala, was the same man who had pulled him from a burning house decades ago. His mind reeled. Samuel's name had been in the records all this time, yet Arthur had never thought to look back. He had always framed his survival as a turning point, a moment that proved his resilience. But now he saw it differently. His survival wasn't his doing. It was Samuel's sacrifice. Days later, Arthur received an invitation to a city-organized event honoring local heroes. As one of the gala's main benefactors, Arthur was asked to attend and give a short speech. Ordinarily, it would have been a routine affair for him, another opportunity to bask in the limelight. But now, the thought of standing on that stage filled him with unease. When the evening came, Arthur arrived at the venue, dressed impeccably as always. The auditorium was modest compared to the grandeur of his gala, but the crowd was lively. Veterans and their families filled the seats, their conversations a low hum of anticipation. Arthur's speech went by in a blur. He delivered the usual platitudes about courage and service, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. As he stepped away from the podium, his eyes scanned the crowd. And then he saw him. Samuel Gray was seated in the second row, his posture straight, his expression calm. Arthur's stomach knotted. He watched as Samuel was called to the stage to receive a special commendation for his years of service, including his role in rescuing civilians during a residential fire. Samuel accepted the award with quiet dignity. His voice, steady but tinged with emotion, carried across the room. "I don't consider myself a hero," Samuel said. "I was just doing my job. But I'll never forget the faces of the people I pulled from those flames. I hope they've lived lives worth saving." The words struck Arthur like a blow. He felt as though the room had shrunk, the air heavy with unspoken judgment. After the ceremony, Arthur lingered near the exits, waiting for Samuel. As the crowd thinned, he finally saw his chance. "Mr. Gray," Arthur called, his voice hesitant. Samuel turned, his expression neutral but guarded. "Yes." Arthur swallowed hard. I don't know if you remember me from the gala." "I remember," Samuel replied evenly. Arthur hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I owe you an apology for how I treated you that night. And more than that, I owe you my life." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your life?" Arthur nodded. "I looked into the fire from years ago. I know it was you who pulled me out." Samuel's expression remained unreadable. "You took your time figuring that out." The comment stung, but Arthur couldn't argue with it. "I should have known sooner," he admitted. "I can't imagine what you've been through because of that night. And I can't thank you enough for what you did." Samuel studied him for a moment, then shook his head. "I didn't save you for thanks. I did it because it was my job." His tone softened slightly. "But people like you don't make it easy for the rest of us to keep going." Arthur flinched. "I want to make it right," he said quickly. "Whatever you need, funding, resources, anything, I'll make it happen." Samuel's gaze hardened again. "You think money fixes everything? You don't get it, do you? It's not about the resources. It's about respect. About looking at people like me and seeing more than our struggles." Arthur opened his mouth to respond, but Samuel raised a hand, cutting him off. "Save your speeches. I've heard enough from you." With that, Samuel turned and walked away, leaving Arthur standing alone in the hallway, the weight of his words pressing down like a stone. Arthur sat in his penthouse that night, the city lights sprawling below like a kingdom he no longer felt connected to. Samuel Gray's words echoed in his mind. "It's about respect. About looking at people like me and seeing more than our struggles." He poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out at the skyline, trying to shake the conversation from his thoughts. But it clung to him, refusing to be ignored. For the first time in years, Arthur felt powerless. His empire was built on control, of numbers, of people, of outcomes. But here was a situation he couldn't manipulate with money or influence. The next morning, Arthur dove into Samuel's history. He called Miranda and asked her to gather everything she could find about Samuel Gray. Anything related to the fire, his career as a firefighter, and what happened after, Arthur instructed. Within hours, Miranda returned with a folder of documents. Arthur spread them across his desk, reading each one carefully. The reports were harrowing. Samuel had been hailed as a hero for his actions during the fire, but his life had unraveled afterward. Injuries sustained during the rescue had cost him his leg, and a subsequent investigation into the fire, driven by bureaucratic scapegoating, had tarnished his reputation. Though ultimately cleared of wrongdoing, the damage had been done. Samuel had lost his career, his income, and much of his dignity. Arthur's chest tightened as he read. He imagined the life Samuel might have led if things had been different, a life filled with purpose and stability, not hardship and sacrifice. And then he thought about his own life, built on the opportunities that Samuel's actions had preserved for him. That evening, Arthur called Miranda again. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week," he said. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Arthur hesitated, then admitted, "I need to make things right with someone." Arthur spent the next few days crafting a letter to Samuel. He discarded several drafts before settling on something simple yet heartfelt. "Mr. Gray, I owe you an apology, not just for my behavior at the gala, but for the years I spent blind to the sacrifices you made for me. Without you, I wouldn't be here. You didn't just save my life that night. You gave me the chance to build a future. I want to honor your sacrifice, not with empty words, but with actions that make a difference. Please allow me the chance to support the causes you care about, even if I can never fully repay you. With respect and gratitude, Arthur Whitaker." He mailed the letter, not knowing if Samuel would even read it. In the days that followed, Arthur found himself re-examining his empire. 4 years, he had measured success by profits and power. Now, he wondered if those metrics truly mattered. He began reaching out to organizations that supported veterans, not with press releases or sponsorship deals, but with quiet offers of assistance. He allocated funds to programs that provided housing, job training, and medical care for those like Samuel. For the first time, Arthur's philanthropy felt genuine. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. A week later, Arthur received a response, a simple, handwritten note delivered to his office. "Arthur, words don't erase actions. But maybe actions can change how I see those words. If you really mean what you wrote, prove it. Not to me, but to the people who need it most. Samuel Gray." Arthur read the note twice, then set it down carefully. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a challenge, a chance to do something meaningful. And for the first time in years, Arthur felt like he was working toward something that truly mattered. Arthur stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a light breeze stirring the early morning air. Samuel's words echoed in his mind. "Prove it. Not to me, but to the people who need it most." He felt the weight of the challenge, heavier than any deal or acquisition he'd ever pursued. Over the next few weeks, Arthur threw himself into a new kind of work. He began meeting with veteran-focused organizations, listening to their stories and challenges. At first, his presence was met with skepticism. Many saw him as another wealthy benefactor seeking a photo opportunity. But Arthur surprised them by keeping his involvement quiet. No press releases, no interviews. He started by funding prosthetic advancements for veterans, ensuring access to high-quality mobility aids. Then, he established a scholarship program for children of veterans, naming it anonymously after Samuel Gray. During a visit to a rehabilitation center, Arthur spoke with veterans struggling to reintegrate into society. Their resilience humbled him, and their struggles reminded him of Samuel. One veteran told him, "It's not just about money. It's about feeling seen, feeling like we matter." The comment stuck with Arthur. He realized his actions needed to go beyond financial support. Arthur's most ambitious project was the creation of a new rehabilitation center, complete with state-of-the-art facilities and programs tailored to veterans' unique needs. He insisted the funding remain anonymous, understanding that his name didn't matter. What mattered was the impact. He worked tirelessly with designers, medical professionals, and community leaders to ensure the center addressed both physical and emotional recovery. "This isn't just about healing wounds," he told the team. "It's about restoring dignity." Arthur sent Samuel an invitation to tour the center before its official opening. He didn't expect a response, but to his surprise, Samuel agreed. When the day arrived, Arthur waited nervously in the center's lobby, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet anticipation. Samuel entered, his gait steady despite his prosthetic. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the building. Arthur gave him a brief tour, showing him the therapy rooms, the training facilities, and the community spaces. He explained the programs they had implemented, emphasizing the focus on empowerment rather than pity. Finally, they reached a wall of plaques honoring donors and contributors. One stood out, simple, bronze, and engraved with the words, "Dedicated to those who sacrificed so others could thrive." Samuel stared at the plaque for a long moment. When he turned back to Arthur, his face was calm but thoughtful. "You've done good work here," he said simply. Arthur felt a swell of relief, but he didn't press for more. Samuel's approval wasn't something he could demand. It had to be earned. As Samuel left the center, Arthur stayed behind, walking through the halls alone. He paused near a window and looked out over the city, the skyline he had once considered his kingdom. It felt different now. Not smaller, but less significant. For the first time, Arthur felt a sense of fulfillment that wasn't tied to his wealth or status. He had started the project to honor Samuel, but along the way, he had discovered something deeper: the value of humility and the importance of truly seeing the people around him. Months had passed since the opening of the rehabilitation center. The project had quietly flourished, becoming a sanctuary for veterans seeking support, community, and purpose. Arthur, true to his word, remained in the background, watching from afar as the center made a difference. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur decided to visit the center unannounced. He walked the halls, observing veterans engaged in physical therapy, chatting in common areas, and working on art and job training projects. The atmosphere buzzed with life and hope, far removed from the sterile events and staged appearances that once defined his philanthropy. Near the end of his visit, Arthur noticed a small group gathered around a man sitting on a bench in the courtyard. It was Samuel Gray. He was demonstrating how to adjust a prosthetic limb to a young veteran who had recently undergone an amputation. Despite his gruff demeanor, Samuel's patience and knowledge shone through, earning the quiet respect of those around him. Arthur stayed at a distance, reluctant to interrupt. He felt an unfamiliar warmth watching Samuel in his element. Confident, purposeful, and surrounded by people who valued him not as a hero, but as a mentor. Before leaving, Arthur approached the donation box near the entrance. He slipped an envelope inside, addressed simply to Samuel. Inside was a handwritten note, short and direct. "Samuel, thank you for saving my life. Not once, but twice. Your sacrifice gave me a future, and your words gave me clarity. I hope this center honors both. With gratitude, Arthur." Arthur stood for a moment, his hand lingering on the box. Then he turned and left, feeling lighter than he had in years. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel returned to the center to lock up. He spotted the envelope in the donation box and opened it. His eyes scanned the letter, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Samuel simply stood there, holding the note. Then, as if acknowledging a private victory, he smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened his features. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Turning toward the window, he watched the city lights blink on one by one. In the reflection of the glass, his faint smile remained.